Yeah, I'm just gonna let it cycle through again. Okay, for a second now, I'm just gonna mute the drums for a second. We can listen to the progression. We can hear that the progression is solid. If you want to, you can always double check the what's going on in the chord trigger. Okay, so this is all fine. Now let's listen to the so the progression solid, no problems there. Everything sounds exactly as it's supposed to. So let's listen to the drums and focus in on that. Okay, so with the drums, so everybody, let's give Jordan a round of applause. Well done, guys. Well done, Jordan. Well done. But let's focus in on this drum groove. And actually, I'm gonna remember we can pull the piano roll to its own window if we want to. And so, or we can hit Command 4. But let's focus in on the drum groove a little bit. Except this is not actually the drum groove. We want the drum groove. There we go. Okay, so this is what we got. So we can see that one thing that he's got right off the bat, right? We can see that he has kind of fulfilled the assignment, right? Which is why he got 100, right? He's got the, there's a lot of snare hits that are he's gotten off the backbeat with his snare, right? We can hear that pretty clearly. We can also see he's got a fair amount of velocity variation, right? We can tell just by virtue of the number of different colors on the screen that we've got a fair amount of velocity variation, right? We can kind of see. Do you guys know how to read this event list editor? Like what these numbers all tell us? Or you need a refresher? Okay, so the position is kind of the critical one for what's going to make, actually these two, the position and the value, when it comes to drum grooves, are going to be critical for making the drum groove sound both tight and human. Right? When you think about the like how technology has affected the way we create music and the way we hear it, right? We've gotten to a point where we've got drum machines that can play everything completely perfectly, right? And we have we can do it in Logic, we can do it in Pro Tools, we can do it in any one of the DAWs that we use, right? We can make a drum groove that is kind of theoretically perfect, right? Where every one of these kind of falls right on the grid, right? And if you use a pattern sequencer like Ultrabeat, for example, that's what would happen, right? These would all be 1. This number would all be 1, right? When we look at these numbers here under the position column, we have 4 numbers, and each one tells us something distinct, right? The leftmost number tells us what bar we're in, right? So all these events up to here, right? That all happens in bar 1, right? The first number is all 1. Now the second number is which beat it occurs on, right? So these first 4 all occur within the kind of focus of beat 1. Now of course this is all relative to the time signature that's in there, and we're in 4/4, so this is all within a quarter note's worth of time. We get those first 4. Within the second quarter note's worth of time, we get these here. Within the third quarter notes, we get that, and then we have these 3 happening within beat 4. The next number here is the division. It's 16th notes, right? Yeah, because if we look at this, right, this is the first 16th notes worth of time, right? And this is on the third 16th notes worth of time. Okay, this is on the fourth 16th notes worth of time. Does that make sense? And now these further refinements here are what's called the tick. So if we focus in on the piano roll editor here with or I can go here, right? That. Right. If we look at this first bar, right? When we zoom in, this is happening within the first 16th note, right? This one right here. Right, we can see that's the case. But it's 17 ticks away from kind of true or to the grid, right? This one here falls right on the grid, right? Because as Jordan pointed out, he quantized the hi-hats. This one here is 6 ticks after the 16th note. So by looking at this event list editor, we can kind of get some information about what's going on rhythmically in our regions. So this is not just for drum grooves, but we're talking about it with respect to a drum groove. If I move this around, let's say, watch what happens to this 17. If I move it to the right, it goes to 97. If I move it all the way till it moves to the second 16th note worth time, right, now it becomes a 2 and a 1. Okay. Right. Now, on the rightmost column, it's the same principle, but it has to do with duration, how long the note is. So again, if we hold on to this first one, we can see that it is not a full 16th note's worth of time long. It's 224 ticks long. If I pull all the way this far, right, now we have a 1 over here. If I pull it this far, that changes to a 2. Okay? And so on. So if I pull it all the way to be a whole note's worth of time, this would change, the leftmost number would change to a 1. Okay? So that's what the duration or the length is telling us here. The value here in this column is the velocity. So that's going to be 0 to 127. Okay, with 127 being the loudest possible and 0 being silent. Okay, and then this is just what pitch it is, right? That's the channel, and that's the fact that it's a note, or the status. Okay, so when it comes to our drum grooves, how it winds up being perceived in terms of its musical performance is all going to be centered around where it's falling in relation to the grid. So what its start point is. Now, when it comes to drum grooves, we're less concerned with the duration or the length of it, right? Because the decay on drum sounds is often so short. So if I have a kick drum, if I have it be this long, it's going to sound no different if I have it be this long, right? Because the decay has already happened. Okay. So duration is less of an issue with drums, although it would be an issue with other parts. Right? So if this was a guitar and I had these notes overlapping, right, too much, you can see how that could become a problem. So the length is relevant to other instruments, just less so with the drum groove. So where it hits and how loudly it hits are going to impact how musical it sounds to us as listeners. Basically, my argument would be that if we have too often things kind of randomly, kind of off the grid too much, right, it's going to sound sloppy, right? And by the same token, if I have them too tight to the bar, right, to the grid, that's also going to seem not sloppy but robotic. Right, that's going to give me a problem where it's going to sound lifeless. Why is it a problem to have everything be so tight to the grid? Yeah, it starts to pull us away from what feels like a musical human expressive experience, right? Right. We do know that a human wouldn't do it exactly. So, but why does that bother us? Like we can have Logic do it perfectly. So why is it that we don't want it to be perfect? Like why does it bother us? And I think the reason is tied to the fact that even though we have the technology to do these things now, we have inherited a long history of music culture that is based not on digital possibilities, but on human performance. And so if we create a drum groove that's completely rigid to a grid, it's gonna somehow kind of take away from the experience because it won't sound right to us because our listening is based on this other kind of inheritance. It's based on human performance. And because of that, we need to be really aware as we use these digital tools. We need to be aware of what we're doing with them so that we want to try as best we can to mimic the human experience, even though we have these tools that can make it perfect. We actually don't want it to be perfect. What we want is we want some kind of compromise between, chaotic sloppiness, right? Because who wants to go to a concert where the drummer can't keep time, right? Versus robotic perfection. So there's this space in between that we want to try to achieve with our editing capabilities. Because he performed everything in by hand, we have a kind of different set of concerns when it comes to kind of cleaning it up than we would if he had written everything out so that it was all the same velocity and always to the grid. Right? So one of the things, however, like we can spot if we listen to this and kind of track it going by, we can hear moments that, to my mind, and this is truly, I mean, no offense by this, Jordan, there are moments that they border on too sloppy. They just cross a line where I feel like it's not in control at those points. I can point them out for you where I think they are. So if we, from that very first snare hit, like the first kind of syncopated snare hit, it's loud and it's also it feels a little too late for me. But let's just keep listening. Right, so that fill feels like it could have been. It feels a little chaotic to me. But let's keep going. Now, one other thing that's coming up here, I'm going to call attention to this now. Actually, in a second. Okay, right there. Let's just focus on this for a second. These couple of beats of time, or this bar of time. Let's just focus on this bar. And there should be something that kind of, if you think about it long enough, should strike you as like, why does this bar sound unusual? Picture a drummer in your mind. Picture a drummer, so they're playing the hi-hat here, and the snare is here. And this is the kick drum, so that's fine. But picture a live drummer. What's wrong with this picture? Yeah, at this tempo, at quarter equals 128, essentially this moment right here is impossible. It's actually technically impossible to do. Right? Actually, let me say, like, it's technically highly unlikely. I'm sure there can be some person who can prove me wrong, but let's, for the sake of argument, say it's highly unlikely that you're going to have a drummer that can play 16ths in both hands. Also, not to mention that they're kind of offset from each other this way. 16ths in both hands simultaneously. Right? You get that, Jordan? You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? It's like you don't have an octopus at the drum kit. So what I would say to you when you look around at your groove, just go in and that's actually easy enough to do, right? Just delete those and listen again and ask yourself, do you miss those notes that I deleted? I think the answer is going to be no, right? You can. Right? Does it bother you? Yeah, it's one of those things that you can't really like. It's just it sounds better because actually it sounds closer to what you would actually hear a live human drummer doing. Okay. But I like the fact that you actually staggered the velocities here of the snare. That I thought that worked really well. So if we hover over this, we can see we get a tag, right? It says velocity 26, 41. Now it went back a little lower, and then 93. So this one here, you might wanna kind of keep the pattern increasing there, right? Right. That sounds just slightly a tad even better, right? But so as we go forward with that, you can kind of hear that there's these moments where, just a little bit of editing would go a long way towards making this drum. You might want to go into your groove and actually, right, and delete those so that you have a kind of, that your 16th notes are really kind of consistently, right? Because you can imagine if they're using the right hand and the left hand and they're kind of chugging along at the 16th note level, then really they're only going to be hitting one thing at a time. So it may just be that you want to go in and wherever you like where your snare is, then you kind of forget about having a hi-hat there. Now, once in a while, you might just do that and make sure that your kick is louder there, for example. But so let's listen again. That was the whole groove. Let's listen to it again, just that far. And it wasn't a problem in the first half of it because you were at the 8th note level, and then you came in with the 16th note. Okay, so that is getting better, right? So that would be something to continue to improve. Now, the one thing I want to show you how to do. Now, this is it's gonna be kind of cool, and you got to kind of trust me that this is a process here first. So what I'm gonna do is on the surface, it's gonna seem like I'm violating everything that I just told you, right? Like I'm doing the opposite of practicing what I preach. So I'm gonna close this actually for a second. I'm gonna highlight this. I'm gonna go into the region inspector, right? On, off, on, right? And I'm going to hit quantize. And I know that you used, actually, let's just double check. I want to look at it in notation for a second. You used triplets at some point, right? So we got 8th note triplets involved in a couple of spots, or at least in one spot. Okay, 8th note triplet. So in this menu of possibilities, one thing that's nice about the new Logic X is that these quantization options have now been kind of grouped together visually so that you can find them pretty quickly. And so where you would be looking is 16th note and 8th note triplet, right? Or let's say even if we said 16th note and 16th note triplet, we'd still be okay. So if we do this, now you can see, like if you watch this right here, everything moved, right? And if we look at this in the event list editor again, now notice we have, the number 1 is a lot more common here. Okay, so if we listen to it now, it should start to sound a little bit more robotic, which is what I told you not to do, but let's listen to it. There's still a couple of spots that we might have wrong. Okay, so we still need a little bit of cleaning up to do, but that's already getting a little bit better. But now here's what I'm going to do, and what I want to show you. So we're still going to have to clean up a couple of spots for sure. But what I want to introduce you to is not just the quantize, because that's making it robotic again, right? That's kind of undoing the humanness of the performance that you gave us. Right? So you gave us a human performance, and it was a truly human performance, which means that it had some mistakes in it, and that's okay. The thing I want to turn you on to is this thing called cue strength. And what's cool about Logic is that it remembers everything that you did, right, up to a certain point. But like when it comes to MIDI positions, it remembers what you did, right? So if I turn this off, right, if I just go back to off, right, we get back everything that was there, right? And we could maybe go to I'd like to hear it with 16th and 8th note triplet instead. So that might clean things up even a little bit better. Okay, let's listen to it one more time before going on. Okay, that was sounding okay. Do you agree? Does that sound a little cleaner? Like actually a lot cleaner, but too clean. But at none of the rhythms you expected are off, right? So the 16th, 8th note combo I think is right for this particular one. When you have a region to quantize, right, you do have to make sure that you're kind of smartly choosing what level to quantize. But so now the thing is I want to turn you on to here is called Q strength. Now the Q strength is basically saying pull the MIDI data, right? Pull the start times a percentage towards the quantization level that's been chosen here, right? So it's an interactive parameter. Right? By itself, if there's nothing chosen here, Q strength does nothing. But as soon as you choose a base quantization level, Q strength will pull your MIDI a particular percentage towards it. So if I click and hold and start to pull, you can see I start to get a percentage there. Right? So 98% means you're really pulling everything 98% towards this quantization level, which is to say it's nearly the same thing as 100. But as you start to pull away from that, look at the event list editor and notice how those numbers start to change. If I get this down to 50, now what's going to happen is it's basically going to remember where it was originally and then pull those MIDI start times 51% in this case closer to the quantization level. So what that means, how that translates to, or what that translates to musically, is something that will be kind of have both the tightness of a kind of really commanding performance, but have the looseness that we associate with humanity. So it wouldn't be so perfect as if to suggest it was done digitally, right? So if we listen to it now. The remaining things that I would suggest to do here, right, is to just, again, kind of just double check. There's another spot here that's kind of the same as what I had suggested before, right? So, you would maybe go in and clear those spaces so that we have something that's kind of logical, musically logical, right? And there's just a couple other, I felt like a couple of the snare hits could have been positioned a little bit better than they were, right? So this first bar actually kind of bugs me a little bit, right? So I don't know if it's because this one is late and this one is early, right? So together that kind of combination of sounds feels a little like maybe this needs to just be a little bit later and this one a little bit earlier, so they're still not perfect, but let's try it now. Right, there you go. Does that feel different? That to me feels like what you intended. Right, that's kind of what you wanted to hear. Right, and that one too. So it was kind of the same deal. And here you had I think that was a ghost note you didn't intend. So this one again was maybe it's a little late. So you don't have to make it perfect. Like perfect is here, right? You can see it kind of locks in when that happens. Notice how it kind of stops there. So perfect is there, but you can still have imperfect, but maybe this is a little too off, right? So, something like this will kind of take us a long way, I think. And maybe that one could come down a little bit quieter, as it make it a little bit more like a ghost note. right. And this one I like. Right? And sometimes you can maybe have like a nice like go a little bit more nuts in the other direction, right? You don't have too many snare hits that are super loud. So right, and that fill, I still kind of want to hear that fill kind of get cleaned up a little bit. It feels a little too like I'm not sure what should be happening there, but um, maybe clean that up a little bit more and have, because there's like this big gap all of a sudden in the middle of it. Maybe right, you know, maybe something like that might help it keep moving forward, right? Right, or maybe here. Now sometimes you can have like a crash and a snare hit at the same time. Something like this. Right. It's a little, it could work. Right? Something like that. Right? Is that feeling good? Right. Now these three may be a little too similar. So I mean, as you kind of work your way through and edit, you know, you'll start to find, you know, you really want to home in on a bunch of different details, right? Yeah, and you could sometimes have maybe have toms more often kind of thing in this kind of style. By the way, I do love the open hi-hats. Those work really nicely. I like that so much better, right? And it's still like it's so completely still your thing, right? I edited it a lot, but I didn't turn it into my drum groove at all. It's still your drum groove, Jordan, right? It's just it feels a little tighter, but not so tight that it's robotic. The fills are a little bit more under control, right? And this is all just done with editing.